Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving up my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. Today, we're talking about two games, though honestly, if you want my opinion, I would call them one game that's just split in the half because I'll talk about it when I get into it, but you'll understand why I do. Ironically enough, the intro to this video was a real mess because I could never find a good way to segue into talking about the review, mostly because of recent news that caused me to talk about it. My point is, this was in the making for a long time. In fact, the footage for this video was made a year in advance because I knew I would want to talk about this game ever since I made a review when I was way younger and way more beginner, and the review was just terrible and it made me really want to redo the review and also cover the sequel, but that's beside the point. Though to say that this review was planned really in advance was not entirely true. Because you see, originally, this review was going to cover the GBA Lord of the Rings game. And let me tell you, it's one of the worst games I've ever played, and I think playing it is literally soul-sucking. So much so that I just stopped gathering footage and just never touched it again. It is that bad. Seriously, it is that bad. It literally made me consider calling it one of the worst RPGs ever made. A little over above Final Fantasy 13, and that's saying a lot coming from me. But really, talking about this game now in the modern context of 2025, you really need to talk about the closure of the company and the bullshit behind it. The game we're going to talk about today, the Shadow Duology, was made by Monolith, who's been around since very much the early 90s and make games that have been prolific and had a staying power for a long time, like The Blood, Fear, and a bunch of other series that I can't name off the top of my head. The point is, they've been around for a while, and these two games were their last games. Yeah, they were shut down while they were developing the Wonder Woman game. We still don't know much about it, but the point is, they got closed down. They didn't particularly do anything wrong, they just got shut down, mostly due just to make the shareholders at Warner Brothers more money. That's really it. There is no other argument. They were making good products, they were selling well, but that wasn't enough for the shareholders and they basically nixed the whole company. That's really all there is to it. And sadly, this will be a repeating thing for the next review I'm going to do, but we'll talk about it there. But for now, let us begin the review for Middle-earth: The Shadow Duology. The game begins with Talion, our main character, already dead. Huh. I didn't think I was that bad, but whatever. Joking aside, he was a captain in charge of the Black Gate. Okay, we'll talk about this sort of thing later on, when we talk about the sequel, but for now, we'll just kind of skim over it, okay? Okay, anyway. He was stationed there with his family, his wife and his kid. You get a nice moment with them before the shit hits the fan, and they are promptly sacrificed to... well, again, we'll talk about that in a moment. However, he is soon revived by the spirit of Celebrimbor, an ancient elf of the Second Era that I know none of you understand what that means. It just means he's an ancient elf, but more importantly, he was the elf that made the Rings of Power, or the rings that are mentioned in the beginning intro of the movie. Also, to side note, I've never seen the show, I don't have Amazon Prime. I mean, like, you shouldn't go on Amazon Prime at all, just because of the whole problem with them, but that's a whole other matter. Point is, I'm not seeing it, so you won't get a comment from me about it. In any case, Celebrimbor is not sure why he's even here, and to spoil it now, he's actually here because that sacrifice that killed Talion's family was made so that basically they could call up Celebrimbor to come back. And if you're wondering how does that even work, I'm not entirely sure because, okay, just to side note for a moment, because this is something we need to kind of explain for a moment to explain this doesn't make any amount of sense. See, all the races have their own way of death and how they handle it. Humans, nobody knows. Dwarves don't get one. Yeah, they have no souls, people. Anyway, really kind of fucked up. Anyway, elves, when they die, don't particularly die. They more or less go to Valinor, kind of, you know that place they were talking about at the end of the Lord of the Rings book? Or, you know that boat? They were sailing there. Okay? Okay. And they would get reformed there with their souls and just kind of exist there. And if you're wondering how does that even work, it makes sense in the books. Go watch videos about it. We'll talk about more of this sort of stuff in a moment, but point is, not how this should work, but whatever. Really, this is just more happening because it would be an interesting plot, and you know what? I'm always okay with the idea of it happening if it gets to be interesting, which we'll see if that plays out as we continue on. Anyway, Talion is now deathless. He basically can't die or stay dead for long, and Talion wants out. Brimbor tells him that the only way to free himself is by killing the free figures that sacrificed him, and by doing so, basically breaks whatever chains they had on him. And with that, Talion's goal is set and he begins his crusade in Mordor. And that's really the plot in a nutshell. The game's plot is actually really simple. And to note, I don't mean that in a bad way, it's more of a noting of it than a detrimental factor to it. But also just to note something else too, is how short it is. Usually length for me is not an issue, it's more about if it spent that time well enough, and really, I actually was having a hard time figuring out if it was or if it wasn't. Cause sure, while I didn't feel like the game was wasting my time, it didn't feel like I was all that invested to begin with, you know what I mean? Sure, there's a plot, and there are things happening in the plot that are sort of interesting, but I don't know how to say it other than, like my last review, it's very lean and doesn't have a lot of meat on it. Basically, it has enough to do the job it wants to do, but, there was something there that could have made more of, you know what I mean? And again, not to say that it's bad, it's just, I would have wanted more. It's just one of those things you notice more after the fact when you just go back to reflect on it all, rather than something you notice in the moment. To give an example, there's this guy, and there's some sort of history there, they're not very clear on it other than just saying, oh, they just know each other. Actually, to think about this for a moment, Talion's backstory isn't really given all that much time. From what I could glean is that Talion and his family were placed here after Talion married his wife, who was some rich guy or something that had power over Talion and basically said, yeah, go to the Black Gate, I don't like you. And mind you, you don't learn that directly, you learn that through the fucking loading screens. What the fuck? I only mention that mostly because it was so out of place. I legit don't know why they did that. But I'm getting off topic. This guy basically has a plotline that's trying to be similar to his, yeah, I have this desire to do this thing that will basically cost me my family. And he's Talion's nah, dude, don't do that. That's dumb. You got a life. You got life here, man. Get the fuck out of here while you can. And sure, while that is fine, I don't think there's really much of a problem with it. I, again, just feel like there should have been just a tiny bit more to chew on. Maybe show off that Talion has this power to him and basically says, oh, yeah, and then maybe have that realization in front of him. Where basically oh, fuck. Maybe seeing Talion dying kind of made him reflect on something. You get the idea on what I'm trying to say? I'm just saying that what's here is fine, it's just not engaging to me. I felt neutral about this whole plot throughout the most of it. Sure, there was some haphazardness here or there, but really, I couldn't care that much. I think my bigger problem with the game as a whole is mostly because our main duo is kinda just bland in general. These two have just a hard time being compelling in any sense carrying the plot. The situation they're in is interesting, but not them in particular. I only make that distinction mostly because I just want to be particularly clear about my problem with them. Because I feel like the game is trying to do a buddy cop thing where these two disgruntled people who don't care for each other all that much, but they gotta work together. And I'm not sure it's doing that particularly, but let's be clear here, they're at least playing into that trope. And my point is, they just have no chemistry for each other. There's not a lot of scenes of them really talking to each other, or basically a lot of moments where they're yeah, I have some insight about this sort of thing, or maybe where they talk about the situation they have on them that isn't more cut to the chase. Though, ironically enough, you can say that is how they're supposed to be characterized, but at the same time, that's not really interesting. And honestly, there were moments in the game that made me actually very interested. You see, during the game, while you're running around, we'll talk about the gameplay more in a bit, you can find items throughout the level that basically have a bunch of lore and history behind them, where Boy will more talk about these things and maybe say some insight about the whole environment. It was interesting, but, at the same time, it's like, okay. And you might be now wondering to yourself, hey, why haven't I talked about the gameplay all that much? Well, that's the thing about covering two games, where the sequel, let's be clear about this, the sequel is better in all ways. While it carries the framework of this game, it basically improves on this game just in a bunch of ways. So it's really hard to talk about this game in particular in a way that doesn't sound like I'm begrudging it. You know what I mean? However, there's also just the general problem of talking about this game in relationship because, well, if we're being honest, the gameplay is mostly just the Arkham games. Yeah. Like, straight up, most of the mechanics of this game are just a blatant copy of the Batman Arkham game. And that's not to denigrate the game for doing so. Copying another game's mechanic is not inherently bad. I'm just making a point that it kind of makes it harder to talk about the game in its own sense when it's so tied to another game. So, more time than not, you're asking yourself, did it do it better or at least do it at least somewhat well? And I would say, yeah, it's fine. So let's actually talk about it. Like the Arkham games, you basically have a single attack button that just combos on and on and on until you're stopped, while you also have a parry button that allows you to block any attack that comes at you, also allowing you to hit them back for some damage and to stun them for a little moment, giving you enough time to kill them or use a special attack that fills up over time while you're doing attacks and gives you a free kill for the most part. But you're not alone in combat. You also have Celebrimbor, which upgrades your abilities way more than an average human. As an elf, Celebrimbor will give you access to a bow, and that bow can just basically give you free headshots whenever you can, when you have enough focus to slow down time enough. And you can later on gain an upgrade that allows you to pin an enemy to the ground for a moment to wail on them more easily, and also a minor stun that allows you to, well, just stun. You can also later on gain access to a super bow that lets you just instantly kill as many foes as you can in a certain amount of time. And it's neat, but it's kind of annoying to use at times, so I rarely used it. And like the Arkham games as well, this game is also a stealth game, where you can also just do stealth. And after a few upgrades as well, you'll be able to do more damage to foes with your arrows, or more likely just gain abilities that allow you to kill foes more easily, like blowing up barrels that could kill a few foes around them, or a bunch of other stuff that I didn't use because sometimes they're way more situational than they should be, though then again, a lot of the enemies can be sort of situational as well. Yeah, let me elaborate on this more. You see, it's now time to talk about the Nemesis system. This system was designed for Shadows of Mordor, and was the real selling point of the game at the time, basically being in all of the promotion, which is ironic when you barely ever interact with this system in a more direct sense. I'll talk about that in a moment, but in any case, basically, after you die, because you will die likely, depending on how you play, the orc that kills you gets a promotion and becomes a captain. And captains have a unique ability around them, basically giving them unique buffs and debuffs depending on the situation. For example, they may become now invulnerable to stealth, so stealth attacks don't have any effect on them, or they might actually become so afraid and terribly affected by stealth kills, they might just instantly die or just immediately run away, which is where that pinning effect became really useful. And it all depends on how you're playing, and sometimes these effects can just be a little random. Like, for example, one enemy can just be afraid of Morgul flies, which are a few enemies that can be scattered around the level, but in all honesty, it's not much of a thing in the game. So, more times than not, you don't take advantage of this sort of weakness at most times. You just do it when you can, you know what I mean? Honestly, I have not a lot of problems with this system in and of itself because it creates a bunch of variety of enemies. Plus, a lot of them are named and given a little screenshot about them, saying like, Urgoth the Relentless, or Mokti the Character. I don't know. Look, my memory of these guys' names is kind of blurry. That's mostly because, ironically, as much as the game kind of has this idea of having a nemesis, one orc that usually tried to come around you and try to kill you, problem, I did the opposite. I became everyone else's nemesis and just killed them all. I think at one point I pretty much had killed all the orcs near the Black Gate, and if you're wondering why the hell did I do that, well, that's because of the upgrade system, which is a little weird. There's normal XP and all that jazz, which you get through missions and other stuff. One of the only few ways to upgrade it fully is to gain power, which can only be gained by killing captain level orcs. So I just spent a lot of time just killing them very early on, so I didn't have to do it for later. That and also trying to gain ruins early on. Basically, after you kill a captain level enemy, they will drop a ruin for your weapons. Either your sword, your bow, or your knife, which basically confers to you a bonus, depending on what it is. And the game already gave me some already, so if you're wondering why I have a legendary one so early on, that's why. I decided to go with it because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't do that much, but whatever. But yeah, the power is supposed to try to limit the abilities you can gain over time, though why bother when a good chunk of these abilities and the abilities you would actually want, like Caragor riding, which just makes traversing the levels really fast. Though they're actually, side note for a moment, traversing the level is actually really fast in general, mostly because Talion is just very fast in general, and the maps, while big, aren't like big if you catch my drift, where there's a lot of needless space. Like, there's needless space here, but less of it, for lack of a better term. Like, sure, you can have teleportation points where you can just teleport to another place, and usually they're centralized where you don't feel like you're walking that far. You know what I mean? And speaking of the spacing, let's actually talk about the environments for a moment, and it's pretty good. Like, overall, I think it has a good design look for itself. Like, some of it has aged, though that's just due to time, but the aesthetic of it in and of itself is fine, and I think it did do well, holding up. Still looks good. The levels themselves can be a little bland. They kind of blend into each other at times, though, like, when you go to the next section, which, yeah, there are two regions, the Mordor section and the coastal section. They have very different vibes to them, but still overall use the same assets, where they just feel like, yeah, you're just playing one extended map. Still interesting looking, but you know what I mean? And really, the game doesn't really ever evolve from its base from Arkham. And like, let's be clear about this, the Arkham gameplay is fine, like, I don't have a real problem with it. Not really. It's all good, like, and you might be saying that I might be a little dissociative of it, or at least not sounding like that interested in it, and I'm really not. I don't think it's bad, but I'm not going to pretend that I think it's all that interesting or engaging for me. Like, did I have fun playing it? Yeah, a bit. Would I play it again? Not particularly. And that's not because the gameplay is bad. No, it's well balanced. There's a lot of variety of enemies, like your shield ones, which can go fuck themselves, the archer, the sneaky ones, but otherwise, yeah, it's just another Arkham game. And like, the only thing that makes this game really all that different from any other open world game or even another Arkham game is the Nemesis system, which again, to note, is not a bad system. I think it's interesting, it's just, you know, it's just surrounded by a bunch of other stuff that I'm not entirely into. Though I will mention one funny thing about this whole system that really just made me laugh. Okay, so while I was playing the game, there would usually be these weird moments in the game where basically, while fighting one captain, another captain would show up. Then suddenly another one, and then finally a fourth one. I'm not entirely sure why it happened, it just happened enough. Like, you want to know how much this happened? It happened to me in my first few minutes of the game, and just kept happening. It was just baffling, like what the fuck? And it happened in the sequel too. I don't even know why it does that. It always just baffles my mind. And like, those moments were really cool, and I really did enjoy those moments. But it also made me want to know, like, what other mechanics could you combine this with? What ideas could you do with? And now I could just say, I don't know, but I know for a fact they won't do anything with it. Which is where I gotta talk about something that really pissed me off. You see, for those who don't know, at the time, the Nemesis system is copyrighted, meaning that no one else can use this system except Warner Brothers, which is one of the most bullshit things ever. How the hell did this make any amount of sense in a courtroom? Essentially, what Warner Brothers did, in my opinion, is like if somebody copyrighted the word "the." They just essentially copyrighted a word that anyone could use. And instead of just letting it be, no, they just made it a point to say, no, we want to make sure nobody else can use this. Which is the most anti-creative thing ever. And I honestly, to this day, still don't get how the fuck this makes any amount of legal sense or any idea of concept. I'm sorry for sidetracking for that moment, but we just gotta mention that because that is so bullshit and we should not allow it. In any case, let's wrap this up. So at the end of the game, after recruiting a few orc captains because you dominated them, which I'll talk about in the next game, we'll talk about it there because it's more interesting there, and I can talk about the differences and all that jazz. But my point is, after recruiting a few captains to your side, you basically try to swarm at one of the captains that basically was the one who sacrificed you, where he then reveals to you that, oh yeah, you're free to go whenever you want, he's just holding you back. And Celebrimbor just says, yeah, that is true, but I do need your help, like, this is just a bad thing. And when they try to fight the Black Hand of Sauron, they actually meet Sauron, who's just a QTE fight, which is really boring, if anything. I'm not sure why they thought this was a good idea. Like, these are usually just boring and just always boring. They're never anything interesting, like, at all. And it's not even that flashy, it's just him just swinging a bit and then you push him away until he just leaves. Yeah. And the game just ends with Talion and Celebrimbor just deciding yeah, we do need to work together. And we need to stay together. There's a few other things I'm leaving out, but I'll talk about those in the sequel because it's where I need to talk about the other big thing I need to talk about that I mentioned earlier. But for the record, at the end of the day, Shadows of Mordor is fine. It's fine. Like, for what it is, it's fine. It's short, so it doesn't waste my time too much, so I didn't feel like I wasted any of my time. I enjoyed it, but it could have been better. And the sequel, in all intents and purposes, is better, but in weird ways and could have been better also. Like, I rate it higher than Mordor, but not by much. I know that sounds weird, but we'll explain that when we cover Shadows of War. So to talk about this, I kind of need to talk about the original game again. I know, very weird to go back to a game that I just covered. But in my defense, it's more easier to transition into this because it leads into my sort of problem, though it's not a big problem. But it's something that just exists that could have been used better. Okay, let me elaborate on what I'm going on about. Okay, so in the original game, there were scenes in the game that showed off that, yeah, Celebrimbor was actually working with Sauron until he decided to betray him and basically used the One Ring to control orcs in order to fight Sauron. And well, this is important in just showing off that, yeah, you can't use the One Ring against him and yada yada yada, he failed, why he's dead and all that stuff. But the important part is that Celebrimbor believes that, well, that didn't work because I didn't have my own ring. We need to make a ring of our own and build an army. And that's how war begins, with Talion and Celebrimbor making a new Ring of Power. However, as they finish making it, Celebrimbor is taken away by some shadow mist, as Talion takes the ring and tries to find Celebrimbor. After a bit, he does find him, in the clutches of... well, there's really no way to actually explain it other than he was captured by Shelob, who's now just a woman. Why? Get ready, folks. This is where it gets stupid and where I need to talk about really, really weird things just breaking canon just to do stuff like this. So, yeah, Sheila can just become a woman for some reason. Not sure why they bother doing this, even though she's an eldritch horror monster. And just to note the eldritch horror stuff, I mean she is at least the child of an eldritch horror monster. She is the child of Ugolith, the monster that basically killed the World Tree, and it's a whole thing. And just to put it into perspective, Ugolith, after killing the World Tree and helping Melkor, who was Sauron's boss, was able to actually almost defeat Melkor, and also fought off a few Balrogs. Yeah, that's the power level we're dealing with here, people. And just to put Shelob in a power level scheme, Sauron knew he could defeat Shelob, but he just realized that it would just take way more time and effort than he ever actually needed. Then, and besides, she was a good guard there since no one would bother go in there, and if she killed a few guards here or there, whatever. At least she's not in the way of what he's doing right now, and he can come back whenever he wanted just to finish her off. In this game, she's just some girl who also dated Sauron. What? Why, though? This is where we need to talk about the weird canon breaking this game has done and the last game did. Here's my rule about canon breaking. You can break canon, I don't care, not this game wasn't even canon to begin with, but my point is, you don't want to break canon unless you're doing something super interesting. And let me tell you, it doesn't do that often. Because more times than not, when it does break it, it's just for the more of the, why did you even bother? Because really, there's an interesting story here that you could have done. Maybe make her a black Numenorian sorceress who could have been swayed by Sauron and feels betrayed by him and thus works to make its downfall. You know, that jazz? And maybe they're working with Sheila, basically feeding her to maybe use her powers in minions. You know what I mean? My point is, you had a better story there, and you just chose the worst option, in my opinion. And that just keeps happening throughout the game. And really, it doesn't really matter all that much. You get the ring back later on. And that's where the real game, because usually everything beforehand is kind of just set dressing for what is going to be the main gameplay. And really the main objective of the game, take Mordor. And while sure, there is stuff happening on the side, ironically, I say this with no hyperbole, it doesn't really matter or amount to much. And sure, there's a little more, but I would argue it's barely enough. It's barely enough more than what I had beforehand. And it feels like, why did you even bother? You know what I mean? The whole Gondor plot doesn't amount to much and really doesn't tie into the main plot all that much. And actually, speaking on that, this kind of covers back into my whole thing about an oddity about this game. Because you see, I had always a question in my head about this game. When does this game take place? I asked that question mostly because the game doesn't really elaborate on that all that much. Seriously, it's mostly because of a bunch of minor stuff that keeps popping up that it just made me curious about when the hell this game was supposed to take place. For example, Gollum's in the game. And this should be around this time where he's either in Mordor searching for the One Ring, and then gets captured by Sauron, and then reveals the place of the Shire and all that jazz. But then we also see Minas Ithil. This place, which mind you was lost at least 500 years before the Lord of the Rings even happened. And there's other bunch of stuff that I could mention, but it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's more that I'm just confused on why change these things if you're not going to use them to their fullest. Minas Ithil even still being around could have been more effective if this was actually outside of Gondor, in that one city that, where Frodo goes for a little bit. That city. I can't remember it off the top of my head. If I remember it, here it is. My point is, it would have given us a little see how the war is going outside of Mordor, and showing us the effects we need to do to help this place, and how our battles are going to affect it. You know what I mean? And to note, I don't think the characters in this storyline is all that bad. I'm just saying, they're fine. It's just we must fight even if we are doomed to die. Which is fine. Again, I think it's fine. Could have been a little more, but fine. It's fine. Honestly, the only storyline I kind of liked in this game was the rat bag one, which is actually a character from the last game who we all thought died because, look at this shit. You're pretty sure he died too. But no, he's actually just the captain of this garrison, and it's like, nah, I don't want to be captain anymore, you be captain. And when one of his friends, Ranger, yeah, just roll with it, gets captured by an enemy orc faction, he's like, I need your help, man. I want to free this guy. He's good. We've been pals. He's my chum. He's my boy. My good time pal. And it's interesting because he's an orc, so it's weird to see them really care about each other all that much. And sure, there's some other interesting stuff like the ring wraiths being here and learning their backstory, but it's like, Really, my problem with this story in a nutshell is more that I feel like there was so much more potential with stuff in the game that they could have done with. Like I mentioned before, Sheila, Black Numenorian, they could have done something there with that idea. Or the elves here. I literally cannot remember her name for the life of me. Evadel. Or however you pronounce it. Anyway, she's a servant of Galadriel. Someone that Celebrimbor would have known. And there is nothing there. He doesn't ask her like how she's doing, how everything outside going. Nothing. Like, I don't know about you, but that just seems like a sad tragedy. And this character is also weird too. To kind of go to the ending right now, because fuck it, I'm not bothering with this plot. At the end of the game, Celebrimbor is kind of like becoming corrupted, and like this is being shown over time as he's more and more becoming more Sauron. As he's more like, yeah, I'm gonna take over Mordor and shit. And at the end of the game, he basically betrays Talion by giving the Ring of Power to Etherodel. I can't pronounce her name. I don't know why I can't do it. Anyway, basically nearly killing him off until he takes one of the rings from the ring wraith and basically becomes one too. And like after that, and there's like a DLC, which if you're wondering why I'm not talking about the DLC all that much, they're not worth it in my opinion. There's just a little more there. The other one, it's actually pretty good. It has a cool concept, and I've been told that it was the basis for their Wonder Woman game, but we'll never see how that would have worked out. In any case, when you do her DLC, it's a nothing plot. It has literally nothing to do with the plot or what happened after the fact. They're just gone. And in fact, the game ends with Celebrimbor and Sauron kind of fighting over each other, and it's like, whatever. And then the Lord of the Rings happen, and then they die. Celebrimbor just flies off a bit. We're not entirely sure what happened. The game doesn't really explain or go into depth about what happened. And Talion just more or less dies and goes to the afterlife. That's really it. And like, if anything, the ending of this game is just bad, because before you can actually see the ending of the game, you have to do a act called Shadow of War, ironically. Anyway, during that part, you're supposed to defend your capital from a bunch of orcs, basically doing the online thing, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it's like cool for a little bit, but originally this was actually super bad because the ending would be so scaled up originally that it was impossible to do unless you grind heavily. But we'll talk about that more in a bit. But anyway, while it's short, I'm kind of not understanding why they even bothered. You know what I mean? But I wouldn't call the plot bad. It's more like a little before the betrayal is where I think the plot kind of starts losing itself. Because there's a good start in a okay middle. Like, it's not bad, but it kind of like starts on a kind of, I don't know, roller coaster where it's on the high and doesn't quickly descend and then plummets really hard during the last few bits, in my opinion. It feels like the plot could have just really had more time to bake on these ideas a little more, but really, I know the game is way more focused on the gameplay, and there's a lot more gameplay to talk about here. So let's actually talk about the gameplay now. One of the more notable things about the gameplay in this game is just how much faster it feels, in general. Not just in a performance sense, but I mean like it already ran well before, and it feels the same about now, but you know what I mean? Like, it just feels faster. Everything is just moving way faster. And that's actually a good thing, because open world games can have the habit of being a little slow and monotonous at times when everything is taking a lot of time and effort. Really, calling this game a 2.0 of Mordor is an understatement. It's pretty much a practical improvement on the whole basis of the original game. And I'm glad it does work, because yeah, it's pretty much the same game but more, and that more, ironically enough, gives it enough to feel really enjoyable. For example, last time I talked about domination, but I didn't really go into it, but let's talk about it now. Yeah, Talion can actually dominate an orc and control them. In the last game, this was only needed for the last part of the game, but now, you can not only just control captains, but their armies as well, as now you're trying to conquer all of Mordor. Cause now, you actually have ways of controlling your army and making them feel like, hey, maybe dominating a captain is worth the time. Since now, you can actually assign them to actually do stuff. Like, for example, prepare battles against other captains, or even prepare for a battle on a capital or garrison. Whichever you prefer. Sometimes they look more like a capital than a garrison, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. Or maybe place them down in the garrison after you take it over, so that when you get attacked, you can defend it more easily. This is also where I need to talk about the online mode a bit, just a bit. I played it a bit and it's interesting. It's basically where you try to assault either someone else or maybe defend against somebody else. It's interesting, it can be fun, since you're dealing with a lot of more different varied orcs, and maybe they might be stronger than your guys. But more times than not, they're somewhere around the same level, so still, it's fun to try out since it gives you that ability to play that. Or more notably, if you actually watch the commercials for the game, make them your bodyguard and actually try to protect you when you're in danger. And really, I gotta talk about the commercials for a moment for this game, and some of them were really funny, especially the roommate one. Those were hilarious. Top tier, I actually did enjoy those. And really, they are useful, as they will come up to defend you sometimes if you're about to die. And that happened for me at times. Or sometimes you'll find this random orc slayer, who's actually one of the older developers who died during the development of the game, and there was a little controversy about that because Warner Brothers was gaining money through that, and it was bullshit, but my point is, still cool. He's in the game. But my point is, the game actually gives domination more of a valuable use than what it was before, and I find that to be the most important aspect, giving the players more options on what they're going to do. And in the more common gameplay, the battles you're doing while you're doing everything else is more of the same. The upgrade system has been changed now, where instead of the power system, it's been entirely removed. It's just pure XP at this point. However, some are still locked behind missions, so you still have to do the main story if you want to get certain abilities. And I would recommend it so that you can gain some of the abilities, like riding a Karagor, since it makes traversing very faster. And later on, you can gain the ability to ride a dragon. God, that one was cool. And being able to call one whenever you want, so you could just traverse the map. It's really good, and I really thought that was a cool aspect. I don't know why, but it was cool, okay? I don't need to explain it more than that. And to talk more about the upgrade system was fine. I felt as though it was more of a modular upgrade than a straight up upgrade, where you'll basically gain one ability and then one side grade that basically either changes it slightly to become something else or just ups it by giving it an attribute, which is fine enough, but really more times than not, I couldn't care less about some of these upgrades, and some of these were just okay, you know what I mean? Though there's also one other ability. You gain a glaive now, where you hold your normal attack button and you gain a wide sweeping hit. It's interesting, but I rarely used it. In fact, I don't remember ever using it all that much. I might have used it a few times, but I couldn't say for sure. And that's really one of the weirder aspects about talking about a game's sequel when there's really not much of a change-up. You're really just saying it's more of the same, which I want to repeat here, that's not a complaint to me. It's more when there's really not a substantial change when there's a kind of problem, but even then, that's not a problem in and of itself because I feel the changes here were substantial enough, but not in that radical change, you know what I mean? Where I feel like I need to talk more about it. Plus, also, I'm not one of those people who believes that a game sequel needs to change everything or be more radically different. Sometimes the sequel can just be a refinement of what is there. And at the end of the day, I think this game is an improvement that improves the game in a lot of ways from the base. That refines what was there and made it better. Was the story an improvement? Not really, but I would say it's fine for what it's trying to do. I honestly thought I would have more to say on Shadow of War, since in comparison I did have a lot to say on just Shadow of Mordor, but War, as I stated, is just more of the same. That does kind of eat up my problems of the original, where if I had a problem in the original, it already was covered there. And like, I really don't have a real problem with the gameplay of this game, just the story. And really, that's not even a problem. I mean, like, I could talk about the controversy and what happened with the original version, because, well, actually, that would be an interesting subject matter, so we're going to talk about it. So, okay, for those who don't know or didn't pay attention during this time, when the game originally came out, it was a fundamentally different game, in my opinion, or at least so different from what we have now, that to say that they're the same game is a bit egregious. Allow me to explain. Originally, the game had a marketplace, where basically you could pay your own money to gain orcs, or loot boxes. Yeah, and we're still dealing with the fucking side effects of that shit. Fucking joy. And everyone really disliked it. In fact, the end game of the game, the Shadow of War section I mentioned earlier, was entirely harder. It was made significantly harder that players would have to outright grind way too much in order to actually beat it, requiring the necessity of the loot boxes and you getting the idea? And it was bullshit. I mean, luckily now the game has been updated to where that shit has been utterly removed and the game has been rebalanced so that you don't need it. And while I'm glad it happened, I'm not happy that it had to happen in the first place, you know what I mean? And that sucks because I've also heard good things about the DLC about the game, the one with this guy. And if you're wondering why I still don't remember his name, I apologize. I don't remember many of the characters' names. In fact, I'm having a hard time remembering anyone's names, as I kept saying that the characters aren't that interesting, their stories are fine, but they're not that engaging. I still don't remember this elf girl's name. But his is the one that's really interesting. I tried to do it a bit, but I gave up a little bit after the fact. It's interesting, and you should totally try it out if you're ever playing the game. I did, but we're not covering it because I'm always one of the people who says you should only just cover the base game, in my opinion, because that's what we're covering, and that always leads to an interesting discussion about the nature of updating a game where now we're not playing even the original version. But I'm getting off topic. In any case, Shadow of War. The Shadow Duology is a weird game series, where I enjoy the gameplay, and think it's alright, like you can enjoy it, but I do not care for the story mode that is, for lack of a better term, meh. And honestly, I wish I could enjoy this game more, as I do like Lord of the Rings, but this game kinda just leaves me miffed. Could they have made it better? Most likely, but that's not here or there. To wonder about what could have been is fun and interesting at times, but should never be dwelt upon too long. Next time, we're talking about a horror game. Yeah, another one. And this time, we're gonna have some interesting thoughts about that one, where I'm gonna say something I'm pretty sure no one else has said about the game, which is rare to say in video game discussions.